What is poppin'? It's your boy Campbell in the building here, and today we are going to be comparing Dan Cambell to our homie Roman Emperor Aurelian. If you're new, what we do here at the Campbell channel, we take sports, we take history, and we smash them up. That sounds like something you're interested in? Go ahead and hit the subscribe. Let's get to it. Oh, and P.S. I have the flu, so if I sound stuffy or my voice sounds like it's running out, that's why. Let's get it. Let's reset the clock all the way back to the year 2020. Detroit was a bottom-feeding franchise. They were known as Bust Central. They just kept drafting bust after bust after bust. Thank God the draft doesn't take place in November, because I'm gonna let you figure that one out. They had a consistent Ferris wheel of coaches, left and right, coming in, going out, coming in, going out. And even when they had successful coaches like Jim Caldwell, who would go in there and actually make them a viable team, right? And they would actually get to the playoffs with Jim Caldwell as their coach. Lions ownership was like, we don't do that here. They went and hired Matt Patricia, which sufficed their weird fetish to be a bottom-feeding team. They went from trying to make the playoffs and compete in the playoffs to competing for the first pick in the draft with Matt Patricia. And when they actually hit on their draft picks, they typically didn't end up supporting them or helping them in any way, shape, or form, leading to a very rare occasion when a Hall of Fame player in their prime retires. Dog, that rarely happens, let alone twice, with Barry Sanders and Calvin Johnson. The Lions are such a toxic organization that you simply don't even want to play football anymore. Like, I'd rather just not play than be with y'all. And a lot of that toxicity accumulated in the 2008 season. If y'all didn't know, they went 0-16, 0 nilch. They won 0 games that year. I can see a backup tight end in the locker room, kind of having a towel draped over his long hair while he's sitting there all depressed, thinking like, man, I thought when I signed with these guys, I'd be able to turn them around. But that backup tight end had a very injury-riddled year with the Detroit Lions, so his body didn't share the same ambition that his heart had. And I just see that dude sitting there, hair down, towel on his head, thinking like, you know what, I'm gonna turn these guys around one way or another. That backup tight end was Mr. Dan Cambell, who was a player for the Lions. We're gonna go back around 1,800 years in the past. There's this place called Rome. You might have heard of it. Rome was going through something similar that the Lions were going through. Even though the century before they were one of the most, if not the most strongest empire to ever live, 3rd century they were facing what's famously called the 3rd century crisis, and Rome was in very big danger of possibly collapsing as an empire. Boil it down into a few simple points. First of all, they were big. They were huge, like mega huge. And the problem is, this is before the advent of cars, trains, planes, and transportation. You wanted to get somewhere, you either walked or you went on a horse, which horse was better, but you had to stop, let it rest, give it food. So when you're talking about an empire of this magnitude, of this size, it's harder to defend some of the borders that are on the extreme end of Rome. So what would end up happening is you had barbarians, you had Goths, you had not those Goths. You had these Goths. You had them abusing this logistical sort of nightmare that Rome was going through. It was like, hey, they're kind of fighting like 3-4 wars at the same time, and they're very stretched out. Their men are very stretched out. By the time they start attacking, it would take days, if not weeks, for word to get back to the main city, and then for them to prepare an army, send out the army, and the army has to make their way all the way there. Keep in mind, they can't just make it all the way there. They have to sit and rest and whatever. By the time they get over to the place that's going through that specific issue, whatever area that was asking for help was already sacked by then and destroyed. A lot of these countries that were parts of Rome's border were like, look man, we should just be independent, be our own country, have our own army. We don't have to rely on Daddy Rome to take his sweet time to come rescue us. So you had countries that were threatening to basically revolt, and you had different factions taking advantage of the fact that Rome was spread so thin and trying to take over land. Second issue is they were dealing with what I believe is the cruelest mistress when it comes to ruining any country, period, and that was a hyperinflation period where their coin was being devalued horribly. There is a lot of reasons that were naturally causing this to occur, but where they minted the coins, there was a lot of sketchy stuff going on there as well, right? Which further increase the inflation. You have bad logistics, running the ball down the court, throwing it over to the homie hyperinflation, and then they throw the alley-oop to pandemic. Rome was already very weak, so pandemics came in, multiple pandemics. A lot of people believe it was a combination of smallpox and the flu would come over and ravage all of Rome. And throughout all this, while an empire beneath our very eyes is crumbling, lays a man there, part of the Roman army, sitting there with his helmet on his waist, looking down, thinking, who's gonna turn Rome around? Who's gonna fix these issues? That man had a huge heart. His name was Lucius Domitius Aurelianus. People called him Aurelian for short. Now let's go forward a little bit to the year 2010. Dan Cambell, after retiring, became an intern coach at Miami and then was promoted to the tight end coach from the years 2011 to 2015. The Dolphins in 2015 decided to then fire their coach Joe Philbin, and with a very interesting move, went ahead and promoted Dan Cambell to be the interim head coach. Now I found this very interesting because typically when a team fires a coach and they need to promote somebody from within as an interim head coach, typically it'll be somebody like a coordinator, offensive defensive coordinator, maybe a quarterbacks coach. I don't think I've ever seen them take the tight end coach and then promote him to the interim head coach. It leads me to believe that as a tight ends coach, he was showing a lot of promise already in his coaching ability. And how did he do? Well, first game, Dolphins went out and beat the Titans 38-10. Then they went on the next week and beat the Texans, who finished the season 9-7, so pretty slightly above average team, beat them 44-26. And Dan's first 2 weeks, the man had scored 82 points. Joe Philbin had started the season 1-3 before he got fired. The same team, same player, same everything that Dan Cambell inherited. Joe Philbin was only able to get them to score 65 in the first 4 weeks. Dan Cambell, in his first 2 weeks, they scored 82. I need you to let that sink in. And he ended up finishing the season winning 5 games and losing 7. Now, keep in mind, the dude had to take over in the middle of the year, not being able to put in a game plan together, not being able to hire his coordinators that he wanted, not being able to draft the guys that he wants on his team, wasn't able to implement anything on his own. What he showed was his ability to inspire players. I mean, I'm gonna read this quote. I'll put a link above of where I got this quote. Campbell's plan to turn around Dolphins includes holding tougher, more intense practices, coaching more aggressively on game days. Although Campbell said he has the utmost respect for Philbin, he explained that he will do things much different now that he's running the team. According to Campbell, there wasn't enough competition during Miami's preparation and it spilled over onto the field. Very, very interesting. So after a coach comes in, rallies the troops, gets everybody behind him, and is able to put in a decent outcome with 1,000 variables against him, what did the Dolphins do? They said, thank you for your services. You can go looking for work somewhere else. And maybe I'd excuse this if they had a good person in mind to hire. The person they ended up hiring was Adam Gase, who went from biting kneecaps to snorting kneecaps. And as you can see by the jersey, I am a Dolphins fan. And the fact that I'm watching Dan Cambell do what Dan Campbell's doing right now currently with Detroit breaks my heart in every single way. I'm going to stop talking about it before I start crying. Moving on, Dan went on to the New Orleans Saints, where he learned under Sean Payton for about 4 years, till eventually Dan got his next opportunity to become a head coach again. For who? For the team he formerly played and went 0-16 with, the Detroit Lions. All right, now we're going to go back in time again, and we're going to go visit our homeboy Aurelian and see what's up. So Aurelian done worked his way up the army. He done worked his way up so much that the dude was hired to be part of the personal entourage of then Emperor Gallienus. So what was the homeboy Gallienus up to? Well, Gallienus was at war with one of his former generals, Aureolus. I might be pronouncing these names horribly, and if I am, like, first of all, I'm sick. Second of all, I don't speak Latin. So, you know, like, but yeah, Aureolus basically wanted the title for emperor himself. He was able to back up Aureolus and corner him in a place called Mediolanum, which is modern day Milan. Now that he's cornered, we could just start a siege and basically starve him and his army. But what he didn't plan on was during the siege, he was going to get assassinated. Now, to this day, it's still debated if Aurelian took part in this assassination. The person we did know that was involved was Claudius. Why? Killed him to become the next emperor. Aureolus was basically sitting there like, hey yo, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? Let's work together. And Emperor Claudius was like, fam, you betrayed your superior and now you want to work for me? There are snakes in the grass and I finna cut the lawn. Claudius went and killed homeboy Aureolus and killed his men. And through all this, Aurelian was being promoted even higher to the point where the dude had his own troops. He had his own people with him, right? And Claudius basically was struggling at certain points with the Goths. Now, when I say struggling, they were still winning a lot of these fights, but with a lot more casualty than intended. See, when you're Rome, it's like Alabama playing against like some unknown community college, and Alabama only winning by like, you know, a touchdown. You should be winning 80-0. So the fact that Rome was taking in a lot of losses, it was affecting them. And keep in mind, they have all these things affecting their empire. So losing, strong, capable men that are able to do a lot within the empire, it's not gonna bode well, especially for the border crisis. He said, "Hey Aurelian, can you help?" And Aurelian was a masterful tactician. He said, "Bet." Went out and would find ways to split the Goths into smaller forces, and that way he was able to take them out much easier. And he would use the terrain around him and force and corner them in between his army and a river. Aurelian making quick work of this army. He was doing a good job. Claudius fell sick, probably to one of the diseases, one of the pandemics that were going around that time in Rome's era. And Claudius said, "Hey, can you continue fighting off the Goths for me till they're out?" Aurelian said, "Sure thing." Later on, while Aurelian was most likely celebrating another victory with his army, just chilling out, just laughing it off, like, what's up, we did it. Probably giving a toast out to the troops, celebrating them for everything they did. Letter came in. He opened the letter. The Emperor Claudius had died. He succumbed to his illness, and they said they were gonna make the next emperor, Claudius's brother Quintillus, the next emperor. And Aurelian was like, "We don't do that here." Went out with his big old army and crushed Quintilius's army, and asserted himself as the new emperor of Rome. Now that the heroes have arrived and have established themselves at the position of leadership to be able to make change happen, now we're gonna go over to 2021, where Dan Cambell was finally hired by the Detroit Lions. And let me kind of break this down. Football is heavily inspired by war. A lot of the plays derive their name from military action, military strategies that work in a similar way on the battlefield. You had to secure your borders. That was very important in war. Hey, you have to secure your borders. In any war, you have to secure your borders, because if your borders aren't secure, the enemy can get in and eventually make their way to your capital and take you out. Therefore, you gotta dig trenches, and the more secure your trenches are, the better your odds are when it comes to winning a war. Football, the trenches are the offensive line and the defensive line. These are vital to win games. These are vital because you can control the tempo of the game. So the trenches are very important. And Dan Cambell, that's what he focused on primarily at the beginning of his time in Detroit. He said, we're going to build a wall offensively and defensively, right? Their offensive line is probably the best in the NFL, and their defensive line, when healthy, is one of the better defensive lines in the entire NFL. And there was a lot of Lions teams before, especially when Matthew Stafford was the quarterback, where, hey, Matthew Stafford had potential Hall of Fame talent, and you have somebody like Calvin Johnson, who is a Hall of Fame receiver. And I think, yeah, Matthew Stafford with that Super Bowl locks up his place as being a Hall of Fame quarterback. You have a Hall of Fame quarterback to a Hall of Fame receiver, yet they weren't able to do much because guess what? Matthew kept getting hit and hit and hit, and that messes not just with your quarterback physically, like health-wise, like every time they get sacked, there's a potential they can get hurt. It also messes with their minds because they start seeing ghosts left and right. They start throwing the ball pre-anticipating a sack, basically throwing it much earlier than needed to, and they end up throwing picks. So he made sure, hey, whoever we have at quarterback, they're gonna have one of, if not the very best offensive line in the entire NFL. Same thing with defense. Our secondary could struggle here and there, but if we have a strong D-line, our defense will hold. Okay, so Dan Cambell secured his borders. Now, to me, I equate draft picks with a currency. You can trade them for other assets like players, or you can wait till the draft starts and you can use that draft pick to then select a player that you think is going to help your team. It is a very vital currency. And for teams like Detroit, the currency wasn't worth much because they kept on drafting bust after bust after bust, occasionally hitting on one or two guys, but again, not enough for them to have a stacked or good enough roster to make a run and potentially win it all. So Dan Cambell had a big influence on who they end up selecting. Again, dude wants dudes that will bite someone's kneecap off, right? There ain't that many people in the world that are willing to bite someone's kneecap off, right? With his philosophy, his GM understanding that, and him having a big part, I do give him a lot of the credit, not most, but a lot of the credit for the draft decisions that were made. Since Dan Campbell's been the head coach, each of their drafts have averaged at least 2 to 3 Pro Bowlers a year. Now, is that average going to keep up? I don't think so, because, I mean, he had a lot of picks from a few of those trades that he made. But, I mean, even if you average 1 Pro Bowler per draft, your team will be unbeatable after a few years. So, the currency that is draft picks, he took that. Something that for the Lions, the equivalent of a lottery ticket. We're going to draft a bunch of busts and hope one of them just turns out to be a crazy talent that we never expected them to be. Where now he turned them into a legitimate currency. So at the end of the day, he fixed the borders and he fixed the currency of the Detroit Lions, which is draft picks. Last but not least, and I've been kind of talking about it, he fixed the culture in Detroit. Even his first year where they only won 3 games, a lot of people were like, they were a very scrappy team. They were a very underrated 3-win team. You put them against a lot of these other 3-win teams and they'll smoke them. And again, that same philosophy they had in Miami where we're going to practice more aggressive. We're going to be more aggressive. We're going to have that competitive edge on Sundays that no other team has and no other team can match. Eventually, all these things, building a wall, offensive and defensive line, fixing his currency, which were the draft picks, and fixing the entire culture of the Lions. We've gotten to such a place where now they're missing David Montgomery and Aiden Hutchinson, literally 2 of their best players, and they're still hitting their stride like they never stopped. And at this point, if they keep following that trajectory of improving every year, next year they might just go undefeated. Like if they follow that trajectory and don't have any crazy injuries, there's a legitimate chance they could go undefeated and are still currently one of the top teams in the entire NFL and are one of the biggest Super Bowl favorites. And that's something you haven't been able to say about the Lions in a very, very long time. This is how Dan Cambell fixed the Lions. Now, how did Aurelian do it? Our homeboy Aurelian. That man used his ability to be able to fight. That man used his ability to be a great general when it comes to routing the troops up and inspiring them. Kind of like Dan Cambell was. There was multiple big threats. I'm talking different countries. It wasn't just Rome was facing one op. They had ops everywhere. That man said big bets. When he became emperor, took his legions everywhere and cleaned house. Oh, there's an army of Goths invading from the north. Boom, destroyed them. Who's next? Oh, there's an army from the east coming through. Boom, destroyed. Oh, there's an army coming from the west. Boom. Oh, there's an army coming from this side, that side. Blah, blah, blah. Boom, boom, boom. And was able to logistically find better ways for the army to come through and actually defend their borders. So just like Dan Cambell, he secured the borders. What was the next thing that Campbell did? Fix the currency. Remember how previously I was saying there was some shady stuff happening when they mint the coins in Rome, causing the inflation that was already occurring to occur at an even faster pace. He went and resolved that, and it wasn't easy because the people at the mint were basically got people in the city to turn against the emperor, and he was facing a civil revolt. He was able to put the civil revolt out, and the person that was in charge of the mint, he was able to remove him and put people that he trusted to be able to run the mint. Now Rome still had inflation because that was just the direction they were heading in, but at a much slower pace. He fixed the currency issue that was occurring in Rome, similar to Dan Cambell with the draft picks. And how did he fix culture? Rome had a pantheon of gods. Basically, they had gods for everything. I mean, they took a lot of inspiration from the way the Greeks handled their religions and basically created these pantheons with multiple gods. Somebody might worship Jupiter, somebody else might worship Mars, and then that might be another reason why they don't like each other. He said, no. We're gonna get Sol Invictus, which is what they believe to be the sun god, and make them the one true god. We're gonna unite culturally through one religion, right? And the funny thing is, this cultural impact to this day affects us. That's how crazy this is. He made the day that the god Sol Invictus, the god of the sun, was born, a holiday on December 25th. Now, if you know what December 25th is, it's Christmas. Now, it is rumored that Constantine, the man that made Christianity the official religion of Rome, about 100 or so years later, I'm going to have the years up here or on the side, Constantine basically pulled a Kendrick Lamar. When Drake dropped his song, Family Matters, Kendrick dropped Meet the Grams right after to kind of step on Family Matters song, which was a genius move at the end of the day. And it's believed that Constantine made the celebration of Jesus's birth on December 25th to kind of step on the sun god's holiday that was established about 100 years before then. So to this day, so every time December 25th comes around and you start seeing all these things for Christmas, just know that Aurelian most likely played a huge part in that even happening. And the crazy thing is about what Dan Cambell did and what Aurelian did, Dan Cambell turned his team around, I would say, in about 3 to 4 years. Completely turned the culture and franchise around in about a 3 to 4 year period. Aurelian did all this in about 5 years. He was later on assassinated because, again, and we were in the 3rd century crisis, and emperors were getting assassinated left and right because things were crazy. But it is believed that Aurelian's actions saved Rome and kept it going a lot further. But luckily, unlike Aurelian, Dan's story is still being written. In Detroit, they went from being bottom feeders to being one of the top competing teams to win it all. But they still haven't won one. There are Lombardis to be won and history to be written. By the way, I was trying to record this earlier because, you know, with the Vikings versus Lions game, it's going to be kind of intense. So I really wanted to get this out beforehand. Probably not, because editing's going to take a while. It was Thursday night. My homeboys was like, get on Marvel Rivals. And I was like, man, I've been addicted to that game. So I got on it. And I was like, I'll record on Friday. On Friday, I got the flu, man. And I was bad. I was way worse than I am now. Today, I felt a little better. So I was like, the grind don't stop. I got to punish myself for not recording on Thursday. So this is my punishment, is forcing myself to make this video. Even though I'm sick and it's 1 a.m., I do not care. I will bring this video out. So yeah, if you respect the hustle, respect the grind never stops. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and have a great day.